So is this? Yeah, great. Good evening, and thank you very much for being here tonight to listen to some of what I have to say. And also thank you very much to Chris and Louise and the Malta Design Week organisers for inviting me today. I actually have a little bit of history with Malta. I actually spent a number of years living here. So, and I remember when I lived here back in the 80s, this was a very close memory for me. This is obviously Bersibouja, but this is how I remember it. And of course today it's changed considerably, and Malta is obviously changing, but it's nice to see some of it is still similar. And obviously parts of Valletta remain very much the same. I actually went to the Anglican Cathedral whilst I was living here and went to school in De La Salle. So I actually have a very close affinity with Malta, and when, to cut a long story short, when we were approached to work here, and in particular to work on Manuel Island, it was something I was very interested in on a personal level. But obviously, since I'd left Malta, and maybe some of that understanding of the culture and the place here, maybe that had ingrained itself in me when I was a child, to the point where I actually ended up becoming an architect. So the opportunity to sort of work here and to tackle this amazing project, which is obviously Manuel Island, and the challenges that it poses in terms of its location, the climate, the existing heritage buildings, was something I was very interested in. But perhaps before I go into any great detail about how we got onto the solutions for Manuel Island, I'd just like to sort of zoom out, if you like, and try and share with you a little bit about how we as a practice think about design and architecture. And I think as an architect, everyone thinks you have to think about individual buildings. But I think as architects, individual buildings come together and form things called cities. And I think we have to therefore understand how cities work. And a lot of what I will talk about is really about how we need to think about the future of cities. As this slide says, cities are the nodes of global networks in the modern world. And to provide an answer for future living in the cities, we have to think about transportation, mobility. We have to think about energy efficiency. And we have to think about the environment and how we design in an environment-friendly development. And these are really the big issues that we have to consider when we're thinking about living in cities. We're now living in a time where there's this enormous population growth. We're seeing huge numbers of people being born, particularly in the less developed parts of the world. So in places like India and Africa, huge numbers of population growth is happening down there. And it's interesting, if we look at that much more closely, we find that not only are we getting a large population growth, but we're also seeing this phenomena of migrating into urban environments. People are no longer farming, they're no longer living in the countryside. They see the great opportunities that the cities offer. And so people are moving very rapidly into cities. And it's interesting that here in Europe, for 120 years, something like that, our cities have evolved and grown and adapted as we've grown and grown and grown. And it's taken, hundreds of years to get to that point. Whereas you look at cities in China these days, and they're trying to accelerate that whole growth process into something like 20 years. So it's a huge task and a huge sort of, if you like, problems that they have to solve or not solve, as the case may be, to get to where we got to in a much shorter space of time. And of course, cities themselves can't really cope with this vast migration of people. And so we get this phenomenon of shanty towns, slum areas, where people come into the cities looking for future, and they really can't live anywhere, and they end up in these sorts of environments. And there's something like, I think it's 900 million people in 2000 were actually living in this type of environment. So it's obviously clearly a problem that we really need to deal with. There's also a huge relationship between those people that don't have access to simple things like energy or sanitation. That really affects their lives in a significant manner. It affects the things like obviously their infant mortality, life expectancy, but also their own human development. How can they develop as people if they don't have access to those necessary things? And of course, political freedom as well comes into that. This is interesting because I think we all know that we live on planet Earth, and we all understand that, but of course we only have one planet, and therefore we only have one planet's resources. We don't have anything else. We can't borrow from anywhere else. And there is a sort of a statistic that talks about for every one of us living in this planet, it takes something like 2 hectares of the Earth to sustain the life of that one person. Yeah? So if you look at this, you can see that actually nowadays there's such a significant number of countries and cities that are actually way in excess of this figure. So they're burning up the resources that we have from our one planet at such a rate that we actually can't sustain this. Yeah? So if we carry on the way we're going to end up needing something like, 1.5, 2 planets worth of resources just to sustain our life. And of course, that's not possible. So we really do need to make a change. And I think hopefully everybody here is aware of these issues, and as architects, certainly we have a very close relationship with this and a role to play in this. So we really need to think about how we can move away from business as usual and start to think about how do we get to rapid reductions and bring that down. And I brought this slide in at the last minute because I found this the other day, which was actually interesting. If you go onto the Global Footprint Network's webpage, you can go to all the cities and countries around the world and see how they perform. And you can see here back in the 1960s, 69, actually that Malta was doing very well. It was in, sustainable, very sustainable. And then, of course, like every other country in the Western developed world, it's peaked in the 1990s. And slowly it's starting to come down, and I think that's a trend that obviously everybody needs to really focus on and think about. If we look more about energy use, and if this diagram suggests 100% of the energy use between industry, buildings and transport, it's interesting that buildings and infrastructure use 54% of energy. Yeah? So that's a huge amount of energy. I'll say that again, buildings and infrastructure. And these are the 2 things that I get involved with. I get involved with buildings, and I get involved with infrastructure and how you connect buildings together and how you energize buildings and how all that comes together. So I'm responsible as an architect for 54% of that energy use. So I have a huge responsibility, I think, and that's what we really need to address. And of course, that also has impact in our lives today, the sort of pollution that you get from traditional energy sources, coal-fired burners. Also, people talk a lot about the carbon in the atmosphere and the impact that has on global warming and things like that. But actually, there are other factors in that. For example, these are black carbon aerosols, and these are products produced from diesel burning engines, from wood fires. All those sort of things, they create these particles which also go up into the atmosphere. But the important thing, and this also affects us as well, but the great thing about these sort of particulates is actually they can be reduced very quickly. Carbon takes a long time to sequester, but these particles you can actually reduce. So if we start to reduce burning those diesel engines and things like that, you can actually start to make a direct impact. And obviously we see things like this in places like China, where people have to live with this on a day-to-day basis. Some of us fortunate enough not to, but that's something that's very real. If that all sounds doom and gloom, I think there are positives to this story, and I think there are things where investment in alternative energy sources are really starting to grow. And you can see here, renewable energy investment in renewables is extremely good at the moment. Oil and gas seems to be fairly steady in the fossil fuel, and there's also new investment coming in now on hydroelectric, and also nuclear is starting to be talked about. And you can see these become familiar sites nowadays. This is off the coast of Great Britain, south coast of Great Britain, 630 megawatt wind farm. In the Middle East, in Abu Dhabi, we're seeing this Shams 1, which is 100 megawatt solar array, which makes the most of that climate that they're living in. So countries are really starting to take this at a large scale and really think about how to create that. The other important thing, of course, is scalability of that. When we talk about master planning, we talk about how much area per person and how much what does that sustain. And when it gets to sort of a small block of people, you might be able to have small-scale biomass boilers or photovoltaics on the buildings. And then as you start to scale up towards neighborhoods, districts and towns, so you can start to see the benefit of these larger infrastructure projects, which what I'm really saying is you need the critical mass to be able to make these systems work. So it's not just simply saying, okay, we'll just switch over. You've got to have link the two things together to make it successful and commercially successful as well. The other thing that's interesting as well is also the relationship between cities and energy use, and this graph talks about in particular the motor car and vehicles, because everyone currently uses a vehicle or motor car to get around, and you can see that in the cities where they're much less dense in America, places like that, where people rely very much on driving from one place to another, there's obviously a very high use of energy and petroleum. When you start to come down to the more European cities, and Malta is somewhere on that trend line as well, you start to see where you have much denser cities and much better infrastructure and transportation systems. People rely less on the car, and therefore the use of this graph, the use of the fuel is much lower, and therefore you can really think about how densities do have a direct impact on that energy use. And it's interesting, even in America, I talked about America on that last one, relying on petrol cars to move around, but even before the war, they had a streetcar system in America, and it was very operational, it worked very well, it was a public transportation system that people used. And what actually happened then was that the oil companies and the car companies decided that this wasn't good for their business, so they had to do something to change it. So what they did, quite naughtily, is they actually bought up the entire system, and then they basically stockpiled and trashed it and took it off the road, so that everybody therefore had to buy fuel and buy cars, and that was the only way they were going to get around. And of course that had a big impact on the urban environment. So if you go to places like America, it's dominated by this sort of streetscape, where the car is everything. So again, coming back to thinking about how master plans can work, taking some of that information and knowledge into the thinking. Simple things like this. This is an interesting picture which shows, if everyone drives a car, that's the sort of amount of space one would need in a city. If you could move people away from the car and put them onto a bicycle, you can see the significant difference. So if we can think about designing away from cars, what can we do to move away from cars? How can we deal with that? We've got to then think about how do people move around cities and different climates and different places, but people will walk from one place to another. And if you can introduce a system of bicycles, or you can get a network of transit systems and mobility systems into the city, then people become less reliant on the motor car, and then we can directly impact the quality of that urban environment that we're trying to design. Circular economy is also an interesting topic, because I think more and more people understand that food production produces a waste product, water, if it's not recycled, wastewater goes into the sea, materials and goods, things are made and there are waste products from that, and energy systems produce heat, which has a direct impact also on the global. So a circular economy is really trying to understand how can we bring together those waste products, how can we recycle things, how can we create a sort of chain of processes which enable that sort of circular economy to work, and that would also have a very direct impact on the global. And it's interesting because I was looking through some of our work that we did many years ago, and this was a project that was done in the early days of the practice, when Norman was looking at, or was asked to look at, Gomera as an island. And really, even back then, he was looking at how do you become sustainable in that environment. And I thought it was a very good relation to the issues you face here in terms of being an island and having to be self-sustainable. There was a study done just to sort of look at how we can use solar energy, recycle, biomass, how that all comes together as a diagram. And I thought that was quite interesting and thought-provoking. You're seeing more and more of these as well now in technologies looking at vertical farms, because one of the other big things about energy use is the transportation of food, because food is such a large, everyone needs food, everyone has to eat. So there is a huge, most of the things moving around the planet at any one time contain food products. And that obviously has a huge energy use and all the negatives that has. So this is really looking at whether or not people can start to create vertical farms in cities, and all those people that have sort of migrated from the countryside because there's no opportunities there, they come into the cities. Maybe there's an opportunity to use some of those skills and abilities and actually bring people to create these sort of vertical farms which could be introduced into cities, and that would help reduce the amount of food that is produced and transported in. Again, going back to the thinking of master plans, I use this diagram quite a lot because it's something that really kind of sets the scene for us anyway, and it really just talks about the simplest things one can do as an architect is at the bottom, which is what we can do. We can think about the form of a building. We can think about how a building's orientated. That's just intellectual thinking. It doesn't cost any money. Of course, it costs architects fees, but it doesn't cost. It's intellectual money, intellectual thinking that we can do. So we can do the most with that. And then, of course, you have other things that you can do which obviously cost more. But if we can just sort of focus on the thinking of that, then we can also have a big impact on what we produce. And this was something we did when we worked on the Masdar project in Abu Dhabi. And really this was a project, it was designed, or it was a thought project from the government who wanted to demonstrate to the world that they could move away from fossil fuels. Abu Dhabi is a big fossil fuel oil producer. They wanted to demonstrate that there was a way to move away from that, and could we create a city that could actually prove all those things. And so this is the ultimate end result. But it was a large open plan, large vacant site that we could use. But we really thought everything from the beginning. So it was simply, we looked back at traditional architecture, I'll show you in a minute, but we also looked at the orientation of the buildings, the street widths, everything we considered, because it's a very harsh climate there. It's a very, very hot climate, very bright sun, but people in traditionally had managed to live in those environments. So it was a question of how do we understand that? And the problem a lot of the times is that nowadays the simple solution for everybody is we just plug in an air conditioner and that solves the problem. We don't have to think, we just plug it in, everyone's cool and there's no problem. But if we can actually really think about how we can make a better environment using the building form, and what we wanted to do was really move away, demonstrate we could move away from a conventional city and how that operates, and really try and demonstrate there was a way to create a city of the future, and that really tried to achieve that ideal goal of really not producing any CO2 and recycling and circular economy and all those things I've talked about. And as I say, it was for us, it was a question of going back into time and trying to understand how people lived in that environment, and could we learn lessons from the past. We always talk about, to go forward, we must go backwards to learn, and I think that's really, really important. The other thing about the city, though, was really, whilst it was, if you like, a theoretical, although it's a very real project, we also wanted to make it a place where people could live and want to live. And so we had to really think closely about what were the key drivers for that. And one of the big items of the brief was a university, because they wanted to create a university that program was very much on sustainable renewable energy, technology and science. And so that became, if you like, the heart, a little bit like Stanford University's become the heart of Silicon Valley. That was the idea, to sort of create the university as the first building, which would then nurture the city growth as it grew around from that. So these are the sort of special economic zones that might grow around that. So we sort of zoned the city with sort of commercial and technology components, but also weaving in very closely how people would live, the sort of residential spaces, where the car parking, and the transit story, the mobility story became a very fundamental part of this master plan, because what we actually set out to say at the very beginning was no cars. Everyone was like, whoa, you can't do that, we need to have our car. So the best we could get was really just to bring the cars to the edge of the city. So we developed an idea of bringing cars to the city edge where you could leave your car, and then there was a mobility system that actually ran underneath. The whole city was lifted up on a deck, you'll see that in a minute, and a transit system ran around underneath the city so that everybody could move around and get wherever they needed to get to in the city. And then, of course, any city you need to think about entertainment and also connection to nature and bringing in public amenity spaces and parks. So it was a very complex project because it was bringing into so much of this thinking into one idea. And this is the first building that we completed, which is the university building. And again, you can see here from these images, we were very much thinking about the materials, the climate, the simple things, the bottom of the triangle, the orientation, the form of the building. So this is exploring the form of the building and understanding the shading devices that one needs to protect the facades, the use of the materials. All that was considered, and you know, challenging going to the moon and thinking about the type of materials you need to go up and protect against you know, the moon and the sun. Surely we can think about, similarly, we can think about that with building fabric. We can think about how do we understand what that building fabric's doing, and we tried to explore different materials, different things that would really work in the particular climate that we were trying to work. And this is the completed university on the top here, and you can see where the city is elevated up. And then on the right-hand side, you can see these little personal transit pods that move around underneath the city, as I say. We also introduced some other ideas about, this is a wind tunnel, a wind tower on the side there, which you can just see popping out at the top there. And the idea there was to try and capture some of the high-level wind flow and bring that down through this tunnel tower arrangement and distribute cooler air into the public parks in the sort of communal areas of the city. And then on the edges of the city, this solar array, which was built to energize the city. So that was your energy for the city. And this has been completed now. This is the first phase, and we're hoping that the rest of that will start to happen. It's interesting, though, as well, that you know, it's great to talk about these things. Everyone say, yeah, great, he's talking about it. But is it real? Does it really work? And so we actually did do what we call post-building analysis, where we go back in and look at what we've talked about and understand it and test it to see if it really did work. And this is interesting because if you go to a sort of main high street in the middle of Abu Dhabi on a hot day, we were able to measure the temperatures that you would get in that city environment. And on a 39-degree day, pretty hot day, you're actually hitting 52, 57 degrees because of the heat island effect, all the buildings reflecting light, sunlight down onto the road, the tarmac, everything. So you'll get this actually much hotter environment than actually is what the air temperature is. We did the same thing in the Mazda development. We measured the same on the same day with the same piece of equipment, measured the temperatures. And you can see we're actually recording temperatures which are lower than the air temperature. So that goes some way to demonstrating that what we were thinking about, what we were doing, was actually becoming a real thing where people could benefit from that. So that brings me full circle, if you like, to back to Valletta. And I must tell you a funny story. We talked earlier about, you know, electric cars. Everyone talks about this. And I was picked up from the airport in an electric car, which is great. But of course, it still has the same Maltese taxi driver in it. So he had his 3 screens and he had his Bluetooth thing, and he was, you know, talking to everyone and telling me everything. And we got to Valletta, and he said to me, you know, Valletta's very old. And I said, oh, yeah, it's nice. So we went past the Castile. He said, yes, it dates back to the Second World War. And I thought it was a little bit older than that, but anyway. But I think there's an interesting contrast between what we were doing in Mazda and looking at the traditional built form to, before we even started thinking about the Manuel Island project, we really wanted to understand the built form, what was happening around us here, and learn from that. So we spent a bit of time looking at the city. I know a lot of this is built around the idea of fortification and defence, but it actually works very well as well in terms of the orientation and the protection that the city gives people as they're moving around there. As I say, it was built as a fortification, and even in early pictures like this, Manuel Island was a very significant, you know, site in the middle of Malta. and therefore had, I think I'm looking at the wrong one there, I think it's over there, isn't it? Yes, sorry, it's over there with Fort Manuel on it. So we spent a bit of time looking at the urban grain, trying to understand the sort of the ground plane and how the different areas around us, how the density of those spaces works, and just to see if that could influence us in the thinking that we needed to put into Manuel Island, and visiting places like Mdina. And actually, Mdina really rang quite an interesting sort of ideas with us, because it's a city with no cars. I mean, yes, there are cars that go into it, but essentially it's a city with no cars, with these very narrow streets. And if you go through there on a hot day, you still get a sense that you can walk in shadow and get cool. And it's very intimate, and there's something very nice about that, and it breaks out into larger piazzas and so forth. So that was quite an interesting reference that I think we felt was quite relevant in what we were trying to do. If we go down to look at the island itself, it's obviously got a huge history. It's been through an awful lot, and this is what it's like today. So obviously Fort Manuel is a focal point, the lazaretto and the cattle shed and the other historical buildings, but obviously they're very sort of, they're not connected in any real way. They're sort of spread out a little bit as history and time has moved on. Various buildings have come in with various needs at various times, but none of that's really been cohesive in the way that it's been thought about. So what we really wanted to do is was there a way that we could think about connecting these buildings together with this opportunity to create a master plan? So could we re-engage all these buildings with one another and create relationships between these buildings? And I think one of the big things that was really important and was very driven from the client side, which is the public access to the island, the need to maintain a very public frontage and open areas within the island. So for us that was quite important, because it meant that we could think about public spaces, as we say here, that is the element that glues the island together. So if we could focus on where these public spaces are, and we felt that the appropriateness was really, obviously the Glacis Park is a major park around the fort, so that needed to be left alone. When we thought, could we create sort of public spaces by the main historical buildings and actually step back from them and sort of say these are really important heritage buildings and they deserve to be seen. So we create space around those buildings. That was a sort of first point that we did. And then we start to link through a network of roads and streets. But I think the other fundamental thing we wanted to do was to sort of explore that idea again of trying to remove the car from being the dominant force that dictates the urban realm. So we were able to actually lift things up and bring the car park underneath this development, which enables people to come in, and our idea is to leave the car, and then you can come up into the public realm and enjoy the spaces and the park and everything like that without having that interface with cars all the time. And that's been something that we've been very successful in doing here. And literally, we then, once we defined these public spaces, once we defined the streets and the routes through, both in this direction and also up and down, connecting the waterfront up, we literally then sort of filled in those spaces with very tight, what we call clusters. Again, trying to think about how they're orientated, creating courtyard spaces so we can capture some of the cool air flowing over the island and create sort of cool pools between streets and narrow spaces. And that was really fundamentally how we sort of got to this diagram that you saw a little bit earlier on in the film. The sort of public squares and the streets and squares, again, were very important. So the whole arrival sequence, bringing people onto the island and perhaps, oh, sorry, I shouldn't have pressed that. Perhaps also trying to capture some of the people walking along from Salima and bringing them up onto this plaza area at the front here and allowing them to come back down onto this side, so that it doesn't become a wall. It was very important for us not to build a wall and say, don't come in. It was about being welcoming. This is part of the city. It's actually re-engaging the island with the rest of Malta and allowing people to reconnect with it. So that was very important. Then bringing people, as I say, bring the cars down and taking them away very quickly, and then creating, if you like, a welcoming square, was the first sort of space that you come to. And then the streets that connect either across through the centre to the park, or little streets, very much like it does in Valletta or in Umdina, where you have these little streets that you walk along and you sort of explore and you say, oh, there's the sea, isn't that great? I'll go down there. And creating sort of public spaces around the heritage buildings, and public streets, narrow public streets with the chapel there, and trying to also re-engage a marina front, a waterfront, creating a walkway, and allowing people to enjoy what is, you see so often here, which is the boats and interaction with the boats and the boating aspect. Creating a landing point, so this becomes a ferry drop-off point and becomes also an important square if we're thinking about trying to encourage more water transport, so people can connect to here from other areas in the vicinity. That would be a really good story as well. So we actually create a large plaza welcoming area there so that people can arrive and move up the Beauville and start to explore up to the cattle sheds and so on. And these were some of the images you've seen, but these were really just trying to explore what that welcoming square would be like, a very open opportunity for people to eat and meet and greet. And then moving down through much narrower streets where, again, as I say, we want to see these as what we would call shared spaces. So they wouldn't be traffic. There may be electrical vehicles that would run up and down, moving people around. But generally speaking, they were narrow. The scale of the streets, we'd spent a lot of time looking at scale of widths of streets that you find here, trying to recreate that in what we're doing here. The heights of the building, keeping the heights of the building down and in proportion and in scale. And then sort of breaking out into larger plaza areas, again giving you that sense of exploration and then welcoming into public space. And I've talked about that really, which is the idea of creating what we call the Marina Square and encouraging the use of water taxis to actually connect into here. And then this is actually that square area, so we expect people to come here with a shopping street. There's only that main sort of shopping street that links up to the old cattle sheds at that point. And again, trying to, the Lazaretto is on the right-hand side, and the scale of the Lazaretto is very important to keep the height connecting down. So there's a datum which runs all the way along and tries to keep all the buildings in scale and proportion to what's currently on the island. And this is this street, this evening time street, walking up with the cowshed at the end. So we call this the Beauville as a way of recognizing the traditional, or where the livestock were taken to quarantine. They would be taken up the Beauville to the cattle sheds for quarantine, and you can still see the lines of the walls where that is. So we wanted to maintain the shape and form of that, again relating back to the history of the island, so people could understand that we're sort of working with that history. And again, this is up to where the cattle sheds are, and then this is the master plan in its finished form. So, sort of very short story really, but just to try and share with you a little bit about how we think about things, and hopefully how we've brought some of that thinking to Manuel Island. And as I said earlier, for me, it's a very personal pleasure to be able to be involved in this project, and we're very much looking forward to progressing and spending more time here. Thank you very much.
Yes, the guy in the white shirt.
Hello? Yeah. Yeah, so it's a good combination, the two groups of speakers. You know, the talk on commercial art, which walks the line between artistic expression and serving the corporation, right, the client, and the Manuel Island project. For much of the Manuel Island, well, for much of Toby's presentation, I felt a sense of suspense, because on the one hand, you were talking a lot about some overarching best practices with respect to the environment, etc. And you know, I appreciated the detail and sensitivity of many of your points. at the same time, with the Manuel Island project, a lot of people I know felt, frankly, outraged that, you know, the one thing that's really lacking in this area of Malta is green space, peaceful space, you know, some kind of a relief from the density that you tried to emulate. Like, that's actually what we need a break from, you know? So I'm just interested to hear your reflections about accountability on the one hand to your client, and on the other hand to the values that you are sensitive to as someone who's transforming the world.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I mean, I think, yeah, there's obviously, as an architect, there's a client and there's a brief that we're given. And I think, in reality, you know, the island at the moment is in need of something. It needs something doing to it, certainly. In fact, 60% of the island, even with the master plan, is actually still public space and public open space. So we were very sensitive to the idea of improving some of the parkland that's currently there, because the parkland is particularly it needs improvement. So there is an opportunity to improve the Glacis Park and create as you say, a quiet, peaceful area to the tip of the island. So I think we have tried to respond to that, because I think that's something that's not new to us. That comment has been raised on a number of occasions, and we know that. But on the other hand, you know, there is an opportunity to use, if you like, a brownfield site. It is a site that's, you know, in an urban area. It's not outside of the city. It's not allowing the city to move outwards. So I think there are merit in trying to find sites like that which you can reuse and regenerate, which I think is the word that we use for that. So I think we have tried to be sensitive to some of those issues, and maybe my presentation didn't. I mean, I wasn't trying to give a Manuel Island presentation today. I was really trying to link it into, as you say, a wider story, a bigger picture. Because I think I didn't just want to talk about one project. I just wanted to, you know, maybe there's an opportunity for a more in-detail discussion about how the thinking went and what we've done with it.
The guy in the dark shirt, please.
Thank you. My question is for Toby. Toby, given the potential for the Manuel Island development pointing the way forward to many of the problems, many of the environmental problems that currently exist in Malta, do you think, for example, or do you intend, for example, let's take garbage removal, garbage disposal and garbage processing and removal. Do you have any progressive ideas whereby something like that might be done differently on Manuel Island and point a way to doing the same thing elsewhere? Or will it be pretty much more of the same?
Well, I think that's a very good question. I think, you know, it's something that, I mean, our client not only brought us to the team, they brought other international consultants purely for that reason, to bring in a little bit of understanding globally about what's best practice, what's happening in the world generally, how are we dealing with these issues. And we've certainly gone through a process of looking at all the opportunities of what we could do. We're at a master planning stage at the moment, so it's very much about establishing the principles. But we've certainly gone through looking at those opportunities, as we call them, and looking at different things and seeing which ones are feasible and which ones we could try and implement to, as you say, to change the normal thinking. We certainly would encourage that, and we certainly, you know, would push for anybody on any project to take those things seriously. And I think some of the work we're doing in other countries, we're certainly trying to push in that direction. So I'd certainly hope so. It's still in discussion. We're still in that process of doing it.
Any further questions? Yes.
Yeah, to Marco, Sherry, and your father. Joe, thank you. Can you share your reflections about the change in graphic design in Malta during these years, and whether that has kind of followed evolutions in Maltese identity?
Well, there has been, when I started, when I went into graphic design, as Marco was saying, the trend was that you had to be you had to be an artist. When I came to Malta in 1987, the Mac was just introduced in Toronto. I was coming back from Toronto, and in fact I remember the first Steve Jobs presentation of his Mac. And for us graphic designers, that was a real groundbreaking, because before that, you had to spec type. That is, you didn't have the computer, and you just said, give me 12-point Helvetica and 13-point leading, you know, as we do it now. You had to ask the typographer, I need this kind, I need this type, and then the typographer will, you spec your type, and then the typographer will give you a galley of type that you would actually paste it down on an artboard. That actually was the most, actually for me and a lot of designers of my age, was a real groundbreaking, because you could control what you were doing, not leaving in the typographer's hands to do. You can kern, you can reduce or increase your leading. So that actually was groundbreaking, and I have seen better design, but I have seen worse design, because you've got designers then where they have this very potential big instrument in their hand, which is the computer. And if you don't know your typography well, you start stretching and elongating and deforming what Bodoni did, or what Heffler did, or what other great typographers did. And obviously, that is in itself is not right. In itself, it doesn't do justice to design. Actually, it deforms design, and it destroys design. But this had to happen, and now it's moving. A lot of designers are being taught at universities, and I'm seeing that there's been a very good crop of young designers that are doing great things over here on the island, using typography well. Because, as I always used to say, I had a brief stint at MCAST, and this is the mantra I used to tell my students. I can pick a graphic designer, a good graphic designer, from his type. And I think the computer, besides the Photoshop and the illustration, it brought to our profession control. Something that we didn't have before the pre-computer artwork. You had to be skilled, obviously. Now you must be more of a thinker than of an artist. Before, yes, I was lucky, because I started with simple tools, like the bow pen. Probably nobody knows about what the bow pen is. And even architects in those days used to use the bow pen, I think. So then we started off, after the bow pen came the Mars pens, where you had specific line weights that you could use. So it has moved from there. Now you have the computer has made great strides in photography, illustration, type, page layout. It's such a great tool. But again, this progress has to be harnessed, that has to be well controlled within the designer. Now the designers are capable of doing great things, and they have this magnificent thing that if it's not used properly, you can see the difference between a good design. They're both done on a computer, but you can see a good layout from a bad layout. You know, people who have good eye for design can understand that and can see that. Thanks.
Any further questions? Yes, second row.
Hello. My question is more related to the use of public space you've have introduced when you start talking about Manuel Island development. Basically, since we have a strong lack of green in Malta, do you think that it might be possible to structurize the development starting from the green spaces? So once we can give back to the community, all the green spaces could be placed as a first goal of the development, and then adding new buildings, or it might be done as a part of the strategy, just saying I can give you a part of green spaces and then start building some building, and that's until the completion of the works. And also it might be the opportunity to have housing projects that can lower the renting price that now are going very up in Malta.
Sure. Well, I mean, the second question obviously is, that's me or you. The second question obviously has a wider ranging issues to it, but certainly the first question. I mean, I think we've done what you've said to a certain extent. I think we did actually start with the public space, and you know, the drawings I've shown today don't talk very much about the landscape that we're introducing into those spaces, but you know, and the Glacis Park is very much respected and left to the fort. But I think we have taken this as an urban project. It is part of a city. We see it as being part of the city. And so therefore we are sort of approaching it with the public spaces being city-like in their scale, and also how we introduce landscape into those public spaces. So that's driving that. But we did sort of really think about where the public space, how we'd use the public space, and then fill in around that with the buildings. I think we always try and, as I say, sort of think about architecture as being individual buildings, and then thinking about how they all impact on the public realm, and trying to create a better place for people to be. And I think we've achieved that in what the short piece that I've shown you. But I genuinely believe we are creating good quality public space where people would want to spend time, would enjoy it. The blocks to themselves are sort of edging those spaces with courtyard spaces which are private. So everything in between the blocks is open to is public space. We were very clear not to develop a sort of gated courtyard, gated development. We wanted it to be as open as much as possible. And I think we've achieved that with what we've done. I mean, the drawings we've shown today, I mean, we're developing those themes and those ideas as we move into the more detailed stages of the project. But hopefully we are addressing those concerns.
Guy in the blue shirt.
Hello. Hi. The question is towards the Sherries. Obviously, you've seen graphic design evolve over the years. What are your views about the heavy commercialization in the industry? Do you agree that the profession is somehow losing its soul? how can we safeguard the core trade of graphic design for future generations?
Okay. Good question. I don't know. Okay, working. Yeah, that's been, I guess, one of the big arguments in graphic design. As I guess the nature of graphic design has always been, or started in a way, in this sort of client-based, commercial sort of setting, and there is always this sense of you're working to a brief, and graphic designers sort of need that sometimes to exist. But yeah, there have been as well in the history of graphic design, I guess, stuff like the First Things First manifesto. There have been groups of designers worldwide that have addressed this idea of this constant worry about graphic designers being too commercial and needing to sort of use their immense power, their immense accessibility to the public for other causes. I believe that has become, from what I see nowadays in our generation, I do feel that as with maybe in previous generations, I don't know if I'm wrong, but in previous generations maybe the discussion about that was of a lesser degree. Nowadays, I think students, for example, seeing with students I work or myself as my own practice, I see there is a bigger concern, and the designers tend to engage more with personal projects that tap into their own voice, their own ideas, their own, I guess, stories that they feel would really require the use of design. And I think what to do, that was the question, right? What to do to preserve that? I would say, my answer to that would be probably yes. As a designer, I think you really have to maintain an interest beyond the actual profession itself. The profession itself sometimes could be quite limiting, I feel. And I think designers could be quite inward thinking, myself included. I'm not sort of accusing anyone else besides myself as well. But graphic designers could really look within their practice in general, always for inspiration and so on. And I think we need to look beyond that. We need to look at what's happening well outside the design boundaries, and then we can make interesting connections to our profession and start applying communication strategies or communication ideas to projects that are beyond the commercial setting. So I think as a designer, I think it's very important that for that respect, it's good to keep a personal practice that taps into those interests, taps into those connections. I hope that answers the question.
Question? Sure. I was very interested in what you showed in terms of what your father was doing, which seemed very focused very much on Maltese products and Maltese. Do you still think there's opportunity in Malta for younger graphic designers to also have, develop stories which link to more local issues?
Yes, I'm seeing it right now. I mean, I'm seeing. Even this video that was produced here, I'm seeing these boutique hotels propping up in Valletta, nice design and nice furnishings, very well planned. Yeah, I think designers in Malta still have a story to tell. Yeah, why not? I mean, obviously, sometimes you run out of stories, but then you have to, as Marco was saying, you have to go beyond that and try to recreate things that probably have died or have gone. I mean, one of the things that the project your company is doing here, that was a very interesting place because that was a shipyard there. I remember a guy there. We used to call him Irrodo. I don't know if there's any Gżira people living here. He was a master boat builder. Now I'm myself. I'm a model maker. I'm a historic ship model maker, and he used to build his boats in the traditional English traditional shipbuilding. Obviously, he's gone. He's died, but I haven't seen any which is a sorry thing to say, any people trying to recreate that trade here. You know? So graphic designers, yes, they have to rethink and they have to recreate things that have died. And I'm seeing being done locally. This Berfield thing, for example, the Steffet Tazza thing, things that they're coming up. Obviously, Maltese love their heritage a lot. So yes, it's commended. They should continue doing that, I think.
To add something to that, on that note, I think I've been interested a lot in through the Salvo Sherry's work. Of course, we're looking at history of design and so on. But looking at, for example, projects like my dad's mentioning, there seems to be a drive among newer generations of designers in Malta to preserve or to look for their identity through design. You're looking at projects like Tefet, stuff like Malta Type, which is a good documentary, sort of documentation project of this letter, this craft, this way of doing typography in Malta. I think the danger, it's good to have that, and it's great to have that resource, and I think it's great that there are these projects. I think it probably design here now needs, in that respect, to step beyond the nostalgic wave of that. I think even when we look at Salvo Sherry's work, there is nostalgia in it. But also, what do we do with nostalgia? How do we move forward with it? How do we look at our heritage, our design history, our culture in that respect, and we transform it into new forms? For example, thinking of, if we're looking at multi-type, if a type foundry had to be set, that would be designing typefaces that are designed or based on the multi-type research, for example. So it's always thinking on that sort of line. How can we use these rich resources, these really interesting projects that are being produced and made, and out of the sense of we're losing things here, and we're trying to really grab sort of stick to that sort of identity we're looking for, and how we can generate something new out of that. And I think that sticks to the new generation of designers, and there seems to be an interest for that. There seems to be quite a drive for that.
Yes, at the front.
Thank you. It's a question to both speakers. I'm curious, both disciplines are very challenging and very important as architecture and graphic design. And they should both work often in the same projects. And I'm really curious just to hear both of your opinions, how this is being done, or the way you see architecture and graphic design being linked, and vice versa. And I think it's really important because we're building new cities, we're expanding, and to me graphic design is not just the kind of last phase that you kind of think about in the end. They have to be well integrated and interlinked, and that's really also the new language of the city, apart from architecture and materials. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, I think that's a lot of what we do is integrated with graphic design, and it's partly because a lot of when you're trying to communicate the design ideas, because a lot of what we do is design communication. It's not the buildings and the city thing is at the end of a very long process, but a lot of the early stages of the work is about communication, and a lot of communication involves, how do you get your story across, and that does involve a lot of graphic design input. So in our practice, whilst we don't have people specifically into graphic design, we do use a lot of graphic design elements in some of the work that we do. And the other side to that, of course, is things like wayfinding and signage. A lot of projects we do, large projects, involve a very specific wayfinding strategy and signage that comes with that. And we do usually employ somebody who does that. And I think signage and is very closely linked to that. So I think for me, there's certainly quite a close synergy with what graphic design people do, and we do work closely with them there.
One other thing is that, as Marco was saying, Toby, maybe you'll be more in the spotlight than us right now, because I can see the questions about what's going on right now about green space. And about how the graphic designer can be the guy who promote his design to protest against such things. So I want somebody to in the crowd to say something about that. And we don't want to fight here. I mean, we just want, but this is part of graphic design too. No? I mean, see what happened in South America when Che Guevara and when Fidel Castro was there. And see what happened in a lot of basically South American countries. That poster design was so detrimental to bring down, for example, Spanish dictators, you know? So there you are. We've seen graphic design being used very, very badly, I think, during Brexit. Everybody knows about that bus going around London, you know? So this is a challenge between forces that they have to coexist. I don't know if maybe somebody wants to put a question or divulge or maybe expand on this. I don't know.
No, I mean, yeah, I mean that is the protest side of things. Yes, I mean, I like both Toby and my dad is saying. Yet, the first thing that comes to mind with the direct application or ways that there's a commonality between architecture and graphic design is definitely wayfinding, and graphic design, of course, finds itself in public spaces. In ways you read a space where you're crossing a road, where you're parking, where you're stepping behind the line, road markings, anything. I mean, graphic design is in that space as well, within the direct context of direct applications of city planning or of architecture. Funnily enough, as well, there are these weird crossovers. I've noticed. I've got a colleague of mine in Glasgow who's been involved with the Architecture Biennale project, Scotland's pavilion, and they designed this interesting happenstance project. And he was noticing how many graphic designers are attending the Architecture Biennale in the last few years. That there is this interest, this very weird interest. I would say weird, actually. I would say this very sort of sudden interest, rather, in the weird side of that, I guess, that graphic designers are looking at architecture practice as a way of rationalizing their practice in a way. So design disciplines inform each other constantly. They cross over constantly, and that's how design works, I guess. But yeah, on the note of the poster, yeah, the protest poster, yes, has of course. When's the last time we saw the protest poster in Malta? So I'm wondering what happened to that great medium of graphic design. And yes, of course, it is a contentious case, but the green spaces issue and the idea of land and us included, sort of what are we doing as graphic designers to rather than protest, to have a dialogue, to sort of put work out there that creates counter arguments, and that's where the design dialogue comes in, I presume. Yeah, I think that's really sort of within the context of these two talks, there's a link there in some way, and I think protest is dialogue in itself, and I guess Malta needs more of that possibly within this time.
Do we have any comments from the back? Oh, Calden.
Toby, a question for you. Can you...
About Brexit?
No, you're safe. Can you lose a few words about the schedule, the time plan?
Yes, the master plan is, the application is due for, the outline application is due at the end of November, I think. And we're looking at starting the first phases of design work for the I talked about these clusters. So we're looking at how the phasing of the clusters will work.
Question would be that Lazaretto looks like a hotel.
There is an option to do the Lazaretto as a hotel, yes.
The whole.
At the moment, yes, yes.
The other question
I think
is,
on the Lazaretto also, I mean, we spent a bit of time looking at the history of the divisions, and we've even looked at where we may recreate some of the old spaces again, recreate them. So we did a project in Germany in the Reichstag, and we found it was very interesting to, whilst you're redeveloping and changing things and putting your sort of modern touch on something, there is room to sort of respect what's there already, and you can still sit hand in hand with the history and the new. There is quite an interesting dialogue there, so we're looking at how we might be able to do that.
yes, a museum would be,
Possibly.
any kind of museum would be highly appreciated. How many of these apartments will be there? It looks quite dense.
In where, sorry?
At the front of Manuel Island will be apartments. I assume they are
Yes,
apartments,
yes,
not houses.
yes.
How many apartments will there be? It looks dense.
I don't know the figures off the top of my head. I mean, we're still working through the various mixes that are. As I say, we've done a master plan study. So the current phase is the master plan, and we're now looking at those residential blocks, and they're in the very early stages of design. So things are moving around as we're looking at what the options are. So we're still testing ideas.
Possible to get information once you have decided on?
Yes, it'll become public once it goes to the planning authority.
Okay, thank you.
Hello. A question. You started with a very to Toby as well. You started with a very macro approach, and I guess that's also linked to the fact that you also work on very large projects, and with very large clients as well. And you mentioned also the density, and the density that characterizes also traditional spaces. So my question is, within the context of this kind of large concentrations of people within large cities, especially within the context where you have cities that have been growing, or rather have been designed, or I don't know whether you can use that term, but they have been designed, let's say, for 1 million people, and now they have a population of 10 million. So the infrastructure is not coping, even at a smaller scale, but even at larger scale. So do you find this kind of foresight within the clients that you meet, that they actually are designing, and that you respond with a kind of densification strategy, that you actually design for density and manage that?
Very rarely. I think, I mean, obviously clients have their own agenda and their own needs, but I think we take the view that it's our responsibility to think on a wider scale and try and influence their thinking. I mean, developers in China, they're obviously looking at their own particular piece, but we tend to sort of talk to them about the entire city, and if there's an opportunity to talk to a wider audience and talk to them about how they can improve the infrastructure in the city and how building will have an impact on that. So there's always a sort of trying to open people's eyes and minds to it, and I think we very strongly believe we have a responsibility to do that. We can't just close in our mind on one thing. We have to try and encourage a dialogue and a discussion about the impact that has on the rest of the city and how you can improve on it. I mean, one of the things we always talk about is trying to encourage developers to think about mixed uses and not just to go for single-use developments, and try and think about whether you can operate, a hotel, a residential element, a commercial element, and then we can think about how the energy distribution between those different types can be shared at different times of the day and things like that. And quite often we can convince them there's an economic sense to do something like that. There's another challenge we face now as well, which is, more and more we're seeing automated cars, and this technology is definitely coming. There's no point trying to pretend it's not. And I think that's also going to have a huge impact on the public realm and the urban space. And we're left with a legacy of structures that were designed primarily to accommodate cars and things like that. So we're also talking to clients about, can you consider the car parks? What would happen in, say, 20 years' time when no one's really driving cars? What do you do with all these structures that you've built? Can we think about making sure that they're designed in such a way that they could be easily converted into another function, another use? And that would therefore, that would be, another way of adding opportunity into a city at a future date. So we're trying all those conversations we try and have with our clients.
Yes, the woman in the middle.
Over to you.
Related to the previous question, what about the power that the architect has with the clients? I mean, to the architect has the power to say it's better that way because the pollution, the cars, and everything else. And how is the design process between the clients, the architect, and the people that will live there? Because I think the problem of the houses, as the other guy says before, is not just building others construct other buildings. And it seems the cars is not just, we have a lot of traffic here in Malta, and it's not just put another road. So has the architect the power to say, look, we have to change our lives? And has the architect in this particular and specific city planning has the power to show it's better in that way than the way they're doing right now?
Yeah, I think if we as architects, I take it, I don't know if you're an architect, but certainly we should as architects, that is our responsibility to say that, whether we're listened to or not. But if we don't say it, and the problem is too often that we will make a choice. We will decide whether we want to be involved in something, and of course somebody else will come along. And so I think as a profession, we should be much more unified in that in our answer to that, you know, and to sort of push that agenda very strongly and say, you know, you've got to listen to common sense and not just economic, because there's too many people, there's too much development which is just quick turnaround. You know, it's just like make your money and go. I mean, we're privileged in a certain extent because we're a big practice. We have a good reputation, and people will, you know, to a certain extent, listen to us perhaps more than they would to smaller practices. So it's also our responsibility to sort of encourage that between other practices and try and help that story. So I think if your question is should we, and then I think yes, the answer is yes. We certainly should at least try and get that power to do that.
The guy in the white shirt.
You're obviously from two different parts of the design world and three varying ages. My question is, how much importance do you give to the hand in your design process?
Okay. You mean using sketching and things like that? Yeah.
Exactly.
I've seen this happening while I was at a brief stint I had at MCAST. And I always used to tell my students, I need to see your idea first on paper. Because, I mean, ideas are born, they're in your head, and then you have to put them down. Unfortunately, a lot of the designers didn't like sketching, unfortunately. But that doesn't mean they weren't good designers. But I think, myself, I'm 65 now, I still sketch. I still sketch because I want to see how this line is born, and with the first stroke of your line, probably the logo, it will take its form by the first stroke. Doesn't mean that if you're using a computer, your job is not right or is not good. But I think personally, because I'm of the old school, prefer that the first thing is your designs are sketched, and then go on your computer. By doing that too, people, I'm seeing people, they're not writing letters. They're using calligraphy is lost. They're not using their hand anymore. I mean, which is something which is we're losing a lot of these fine techniques, you know, where we had in medieval times you had all these scribes who did beautiful books. I mean, everybody goes to these monasteries and you see we've just had an exhibition here of the Cyril type in Valletta, beautiful books. I mean, and complicated and beautiful type with gold leaf, you know, and we don't see this anymore. It's a lost art. Once you lose the dexterity of using your hand to do art, you know. Now this is my idea. I mean, I might be wrong, but once you lose that, even doing a scribble, you know, on a paper napkin. Sometimes ideas are born like that, you know. If you have a logo, you know, you're having a shower, and oh yes, that's, you know, you go and scribble it right away, and then you can. Okay, if you're not coached into doing that, or if you've never been to art lessons, or you go straight to the computer, I think it's still needed personally. Now I don't know if it's at university, at college. If you do that, I don't know. You want to?
I think to add on that, I think the natural output in that case, when you're thinking, is always on paper. I guess, yes, it doesn't diminish that if you don't draw, that it's a lesser idea, but I think it's all about time, that you give the design process time, and if you do give the design process time, that should include, or ideally it would include, that human sort of input, or that human sort of output in the process. Yes, the computer has changed a lot in that respect, in our profession especially, but I think in architecture probably it could be a similar situation, but probably architects are more probably still stick a lot to drawing, not as much. Okay, all right. Okay. So, but obviously these processes have changed the way we think and the way we generate ideas, and how much we put into the process, into the design process, and I think it's all about process. Even if no hands or drawing is involved, there is a process behind every idea, and that process, if we're talking about university and design education, that is a big deal about, there's a big deal about that, of course. If you're in design education, that is one of the biggest focuses that at university or at art school. You learn how to think, and you learn how to document that thinking, and you learn how to document it and generate solutions from it. So I think more than hand or methods, it's more about that process, that the process is always there before every idea that you decide to resolve, ultimately, and follow and resolve.
I think that's I endorse what you say. I think it's interesting nowadays we're seeing the technology that comes into what we do. I mean, we're seeing people design everything in 3 dimension. We're seeing 3D printing processes that happen. So it's a very different sort of process, as you say. But as long as the thought's still there, I think it's true. But we're definitely seeing that much more now with younger architects coming in. They're less and less drawing. It's more and more what we can do on the computer, what we can use the technology that's available there, printing things out, seeing things. So the model making bit is still there, which is something I think is good, because ultimately people still want to look at an object and understand how an object works. There's just a different process to getting there these days. But it's quite rare in our office, not rare, but there's still yellow trace around, but it's used less and less.
Any final questions? We've run quite a bit over time, but the discussion's been amazing. So I'll allow one more if you have it. No? Okay, well then I'd just like to thank our speakers, Marco Sherry, Joe Sherry, and Toby Blunt. Thank you very much. And if you enjoyed this event, then I hope you come back tomorrow. We have 2 speakers from Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, and they're going to be talking about the building and design and engineering of skyscrapers. So it should be another great discussion. Thanks.